Hello you guys, it's Grace, and today I am going to be wrapping up 2019, talking about all the books I read since I wasn't doing regular wrap-ups throughout the year. I only finished 27 books this year, which I'm a little bit ashamed of, but hey, it's better than nothing. I changed majors this year. I'm now a creative writing major with a professional writing minor, so I'm taking a lot more English classes, which means I'm reading a lot more books for those classes. Without further ado, I'm going to jump right in because I do have 27 books to talk about, and I'm not going to talk very much in detail about each book. I'm just going to try to move quickly along. So the first book I finished in 2019 is Morning Star by Pierce Brown. If you remember from last year's wrap-up, I totally forgot that I hadn't read this book in 2018, so I started 2019 with reading this book. Did I not read this book? I thought I did. I'm really confused because I could have sworn I read Morning Star, but it's not on my list. Well, I guess I'm gonna read this now. This is the third book in the Red Rising trilogy. It was probably my favorite of the three books. The ending just blew me away. I loved how this book ended. It was amazingly well written and the plot was very interesting. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. Getting into it in the beginning was a little tough for me, partially probably because I couldn't remember what happened in the first two books since it was almost a year later, and partially because it was just a little slow in the beginning in my opinion, but nonetheless I really did enjoy this and it obviously still got a 4 out of 5 stars, which is pretty great. The next book I read was Crown of Midnight by Sarah J Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. It was really good. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The action started to pick up a little bit more even from the first book, and it was just really interesting. I loved learning more about the characters. Then I finished Heir of Fire by Sarah J Maas. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I thought the action just continued to build and I loved the character development throughout these middle books of the series. They were really amazing. I loved the action in this book. And then right after that, I finished Queen of Shadows, which is the fourth book in the series, and I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars as well and liked a lot of the same things as the previous book. The next book I read, I do not own. It's called Teach Your Dog to Read by Bonnie Bergen. It was a dog training book just about how you can teach your dog to read note cards, and it was really interesting and fun. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I also felt like it was a little repetitive. But I really enjoyed it, and if you want to do a fun training thing with your dog, it might be something to check out. The next book I read was Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I liked this book as well, but it broke my heart a little bit in certain spots, and just some of the things that happened in it made me a little bit more leery of giving it a higher rating, although I still did obviously really enjoy it and continued reading the series. Next up, I finished Tower of Dawn by Sarah J Maas. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I love all of Sarah J Maas's books. She just writes really well and her plot is always really intriguing and fast-paced and interesting, but this book did feel like a little bit of a filler story. It was really interesting and really helpful, and we got a lot more detail about two of the characters that we might not have gotten a lot of detail about otherwise, but it still felt a little bit unnecessary to have a whole long novel just for this story of events, which not a lot actually happened during, although it was still good, obviously. The next book I finished is For the Love of a Dog by Patricia B. McConnell. This is another like dog training, dog behavior book, which is my other hobby. I train service dogs, for those of you who don't know. So I picked up this book, thought it would be super interesting. I loved it. It was simultaneously talking about stories from this behaviorist's life while also talking about behavior techniques and all of this other stuff. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really heartwarming and also heartbreaking in certain parts, so I just thought she did a really good job of sharing her story. The next book I finished is Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas. This was such a great conclusion for this series. I have heard so many mixed opinions about the Throne of Glass series, but I loved this book. I thought it was so fun and like so much happened in it, and it was just very interesting. I loved this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It had so many twists and turns that just like got me every time, and I didn't expect to be so surprised by what happened because I'm like, oh, I know Sarah J Maas by now. She can't surprise me anymore, but she continues to surprise me. The next book I finished is Lola and the Boy Next Door by Stephanie Perkins. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought the romance in this story was so adorable. I loved our main characters. This book is kind of a companion to Anna and the French Kiss, and it follows Lola and Cricket. I love Cricket so much. He's probably one of my favorite characters ever in a novel. He's just super, like, adorable and relatable, but also has so much background. And then next up, I finished Isla and the Happily Ever After by Stephanie Perkins, which is the third book in this kind of companion series. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, just like the other two books in this little trilogy thing. The characters are so cute, and you really, like, feel for them and root for them. I had a little bit harder time connecting with the characters in this book, and the romance like didn't hit quite as hard and like cute as the other two for me, but I still really enjoyed it, and I love Stephanie Perkins' storytelling. Next up, I read Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I've heard so many good things about this book. I was a little bit late to the party reading this one, but I'm so glad I picked it up. I got it on Book Outlet for super cheap, and it was wonderful. I loved this book so much. It follows our main character, Eliza. She's the author of an online webcomic called Monstrous Sea, and she meets this guy at her school and finds out that he is one of the most popular fanfiction writers of her webcomic. But no one knows her identity, so they become friends without him knowing that she's the writer of that webcomic. It's so adorable. I love this book so much. It's really cute. It has pictures and like little excerpts from her webcomic. And then some of the conversations are like online conversations, which I think is just a really cool feature of this book as well. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Love and Other Train Wrecks by Leah Conan. It follows our main character, Amy. She is on a train, and on the train, she meets Noah. As they're on their little train ride, the train breaks down, and the two of them decide to embark on a journey together to try to get to their destinations without the train. It was such a cute story, and I thought it was really interesting seeing their very different personalities and how they mashed together. So I really enjoyed this, and if you're looking for kind of a cute contemporary, this one definitely will do the trick. The next book I finished is The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. This does have a little bit of a love triangle in it, which is my least favorite trope known to YA. But anyway, it's about our main character, Molly, and she's talking about her crushes that she's had throughout her life, all of them unrequited, until she meets this new friend of her sister's, I believe, named Will, and then she also has a little bit of a flirtatious thing with her coworker Reed, and it's all about her finally, possibly discovering love. Next on my list is my first and only reread of the year, which I'm very proud of because I tend to like to reread things, but the only book two books I reread this year are Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. These are two of my favorite books ever. They made my top 5 books of 2017, I think, and I finally decided to pick them up for a reread this year. I of course gave them both a 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. I love a good romance in my stories, and these didn't really have that. They had something that I thought could turn into a romance, but it didn't. But I still really enjoyed it. I loved the plot. I thought it was a really interesting concept as well. It's just very interesting because it kind of dances along the lines of what is considered human and what is considered being monstrous. So, very cool book. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it because if you haven't read this already, I think it's best to go into it not knowing a whole lot. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, really enjoyed it. Also the second book, which is Our Dark Duet, which I read next, and I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thought it really summed up the duology really well, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the action kind of picked up a little bit in this book, and I just really enjoyed reading it. Next up, I read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This book has been sitting on my shelf for so long. This whole series has been, and I've been so ashamed because I've been meaning to read them forever, and I just haven't gotten around to it. So this year, I forced myself to pick it up at the end of the year because I was like, I am not going through another year without reading these books. And I'm so glad I did because I loved this series. I gave The Raven Boys a 4 out of 5 stars. The characters in this are just super relatable and lovely and so different from each other. Like, you can feel their personalities when you're reading about them, which is just really cool, and I think she does a great job of differentiating her characters from one another based on how they like feel, if that makes sense. Next up, I read Her by Pierre Alex Gentil. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but this is a book of poetry, nice short poems, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Usually I kind of zip through poetry, but I think I read this during a time where I wasn't really in the mood to read poetry, and some of it just kind of fell a little flat for me. I'm definitely going to read part 2, this is part 1, at some point, and give it another shot. I didn't hate it. I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favorite poetry ever. The next book I read was The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Raven cycle, and I liked it just the same as the first one. I thought it was really enjoyable. Again, I like the characters. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. And then next up I read Blue Lily Lily Blue, the third book in the series. I love this cover. Isn't it so pretty? I also gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars and had very similar thoughts to the first two. The next book I read was Autumn by Allie Smith. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. This was a book I read for my Intro to Literary Studies class, and I really enjoyed it. I honestly wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did going into it because the first chapter was so confusing. I was like, is this how the whole book is going to be? But it wasn't. It got a lot more simple as the book went on, but it also had a lot of really cool underlying concepts, which was just really fascinating to me. The next book I finished was Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell. This was one of my most highly anticipated releases of 2019, and I of course had to pick it up very shortly after it was released. I love Simon and Baz so much. Like, I loved Carry On more than this book, for sure. And this felt like more of a spin-off than anything, is kind of what it felt like to me. And the ending bugged me with this book. I still loved it, and I still gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, but this ending, I hope we get more on the ending because I felt like there were loose ends that were not tied up well enough for me. It was so nice to get back into reading about Simon and Baz because they're just like so wonderful. The next thing I read was Ghosts by Henrik Ibsen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Ghosts is actually a play, and it was just kind of like confusing and not very interesting for a book I had to read for class. Like, it could have been worse. The next book I finished was Panine by Vladimir Nabokov. I gave Panine a 3 out of 5 stars. It was pretty good, but it was also just about this man's life, and those books are just kind of boring to me. I enjoy books with a lot of plot, which is why I read a lot of fantasy. I love the world building and character development and all that. And Panine, there was character development, I guess, but it wasn't a super interesting, fast-paced plot. I think it was a good one to pick up to broaden my horizons. And the last book of 2019 that I finished was 100 Sideways Miles by Andrew Smith. Yes, this book is upside right. The horse is just upside down. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I had to write a paper on this book actually, and I just chose this one because I thought there was a lot of unpacking that you could do with what happened to the characters and what they were thinking and what they were going through. Basically, it follows our main character Finn. This whole book is basically him dealing with his epilepsy, his friendships, finding love, dealing with his relationship with his father, who wrote a novel with the main character also being named Finn, and having a lot in common with Finn, our character in this book. So it was just a really interesting novel and pretty quick read as well if you're looking for something kind of quick and easy. Those are all the books I completed in 2019. I'm currently reading The Raven King. I had to take a little break from reading the Raven cycle because of finals week and finishing up all of the books that I had to read during finals week and all the papers I had to write. But I am about halfway done with this book. It's taken a little bit of time for me to get into this just because I did have such a large gap between the third book and this one. This will be my first book I complete in 2020. I guess you'll hear about my thoughts then. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Comment below what your favorite book you read in 2019 was. and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!